Let's start with the Sunday Mirror, which alleges on its front page that Conservative MP Richard Fuller has received more than £700,000 from work outside his parliamentary role. The Mirror also carries a quote from Labour, which has said the so-called Sleaze scandal gets worse by the day.
Let's take a look then now at the Sunday Telegraph for today. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has said she told Vladimir Putin that he must end the shameful manufactured migrant crisis reaching Europe's eastern borders. Ms Truss saying that Russia has clear responsibility to end Belarus's attempt to use desperate migrants as pawns to destabilise the region.
Let's take a look at the Sunday People, and it's got an exclusive on its front page saying that the Duchess of Sussex's sister, Samantha, lots of S's there, is in talks with lawyers and wants to sue the royal. It also runs with a tribute to Freddie Mercury on the 30th anniversary of his death.
And looking at the front page of The Observer for today, that's centring on allegations from previously unpublished extracts from Jennifer Okuri's diary. The American businesswoman claims she and Boris Johnson had an intimate relationship whilst he was Mayor of London. The paper also alleges that Mr Johnson overruled the advice of staff to promote her business interests and win her affections.
Turning to the UK's borders, and the Mail on Sunday says the outgoing head of Border Force has described bloody borders, and I quote, as just a pain in the censored. Paul Lincoln allegedly made the remarks during a speech to mark his departure as Director General of Border Force.
Flicking on to The Independent for today, that's turning its attention to the North and the deal, of course, that was reached in Glasgow at COP26, saying Alex Sharma apologises for the watered-down coal deal. This comes as China and India allegedly made last-minute changes to the deal by threatening to withdraw altogether.
Elsewhere, the Sunday Express reports that the PM has pledged £50 million to find a cure for motor neuron disease. Mr Johnson has reportedly said he will throw the weight of the government behind a new mission to find a cure.
And finally, Daily Star, as always, creative with its reporting, as they say. The mysterious Bigfoot has finally been found with evidence to back it up. Evidence. But shockingly, the Canadian myth has now turned up in Birmingham. Who knew?
Well, joining us now to look at the biggest stories from today's papers is broadcaster, lawyer and futurist Andrew Eborn. Andrew, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. How are you both? Lovely to see you.
We're very
Good morning.
well, thank you.
And I love the story about Bigfoot. I have to say there is nothing better than a man in a suit around Christmas time. It's got to be good, isn't it? So, well worth it. I was going to talk about COP, however, because it was sad moments seeing Sharma yesterday. Talk about drama Sharma as he was making those speeches. And it's gone on for 2 weeks, so we're going to be turning hot air into action. That was the whole idea. And what I really felt very sad about it was very emotional pleas from everybody from David Attenborough to various nations saying, look, we are on death's door. We implore you to help for the sake, not of us, not for our generation, but we're looking after this planet for the children. And so you start looking at people holding up pictures of their grandchildren, so on and so forth, in 40 years' time. And so what they needed to do is look at that sort of side. And what happened at the last minute, as you said in your report, is they basically dumbed down, not dumbed down, they watered down the language. And it's going from down but not out, is what they say.
And Alex Sharma was quite emotional, wasn't he, when he made that? And he actually ended up apologising to everyone for watering down the deal on coal.
Yes, absolutely. When they're talking about the idea was, I mean, coal, they're naming the biggest criminal, if you like, in all of this about climate change. We need to get rid of coal. That has to be that sort of principle. But there's obviously economic effects of that. And the nations, such as India, sort of turn around and say, well, hang about, yes, we understand we've got to do something about it, but there's an economic consequence. And unless you can help us out and we look at that economic consequence, we're going to have major problems.
That's fair enough, isn't it, really?
It's absolutely a fair point, and you have to go hand in hand. And this is where we talk about the poorest nations in the world are the ones who are suffering the most from the richest nations who are polluting the atmosphere. So that's where, when they're talking about climate change and that sort of thing, people get very convoluted and you get lost in all the jargon. And one of the things I love to do is get rid of jargon, because I think that way you can only get change and affect change if there's a willingness and an understanding that there's the problem. And I think one of the great things, and there was a good thing that came out, a number of good things that came out of COP26, is there was a recognition for the first time that the science was right. Because in previous ones, people sort of said, well, hang about, the scientists don't really know what they're talking about. Our scientists say there's not a problem. If you don't recognise the problem, you won't look for solutions. So that was a good thing. The other good thing that happened was actually putting fossil fuel even mentioned in the agreement. That has never happened in the other 20 or 25 COPs, loads of them now. Good cop, bad cop, all sorts of indifferent COPs in between. But that sort of principle is, you've got to recognise the problem, because then you can work together for the solution. But there was all sorts of good noises that did come out. So they talked about that. They talked about deforestation. They talked about ending and reversing, methane emissions, dealing with that sort of side. And there was that dramatic moment where, even though the president didn't turn up from China, they still managed to do a deal with China, where they sort of turned around and said, look, together we will work. The two biggest emitters, China and the US, will work to do things about methane and various other things. The devil, however, is in the detail. And what's going to happen over the next year or so, and it will be, and actually carrying on, is that people will then put that into effect. And what I find really interesting is what John Kerry said, is you turn around and say, COP26 in Glasgow was not the destination. It's not the destination, it's not the be-all and end-all. It basically is a step on the journey, and we continue to make that journey. But I felt so sad for the nations who were in tears, and Sharma was in tears as a result of it, because they wanted so much more.
So the direction of travel, good then, and now they all get into their private jets and zoom off home, burning carbon emissions as they go. Is that right?
And that is the
That's the hypocrisy of it.
This is the crazy thing, isn't it? Because do what I tell you...
It's not good enough, is it?
It's not good enough. It's not good enough at all. But you then have to turn around and say, well, OK, how would they have got there? Because they can't cycle from some of these places. Could they have done it virtually? I think having people in a room is very, very powerful. And one of the biggest people, we'll come on to Her Majesty in a bit, one of the most respected people in the world was Her Majesty the Queen. And I know for a fact, because I spoke to various people who were attending COP, that one of the biggest buzzes was the possibility that she might be there. And even though she gave that wonderful message on the screen, it's not the same as actually being in the room. So I do think the best negotiations happen in the room. We are in a changing world where we've got used to doing things on Zoom, and other platforms are available. You work on that sort of principle, but being in a room does enable certain things to happen. But I do think we have to get away, and to Greta's great capture the headlines with blah, 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 we need to make sure there is action.
Surely one of the most incredible moments of COP26 was when David Attenborough spoke. And that, I mean, I'm not saying it replaces Her Majesty, of course it doesn't, but it was still very special, and it was a seminal moment when everybody came together and really listened to what my children playfully call the nation's grandfather.
Well, he is the nation's grandfather, and the same age as the Queen, Her Majesty the Queen.
True, yeah.
And you listen to some of the speeches, and I have to say, some of it was not so good, some of the speeches. They're very passionate, I believe what they say, but they're not used to presenting. As soon as Sir David gets up, everybody listens. And I think when he shows those dramatic images of what's happening to the world, people do listen. But the niceties, and I think everybody's already bought into it, as nice as it was, and there's all sorts of parades and people dressing up in glorious outfits and things like that, people bought into that already. The effect is, how are you going to drive them to make a change? So I think you're already on the guilt trip. The nation's already there. They're already saying, look, 1.5 is still alive, but it's on a respirator, hanging by a shoestring.
I mean, Andrew, was it even worth it, really? I mean, we're talking over 2 weeks. The summit cost £100 million, 30,000 visitors, as we say, coming over on private jets. I mean, the carbon emissions from that alone would have been stark. I mean, we had the COP26 president in tears, apologising for how little, really, they'd achieved. Would you say this was even a success at all? Or is
well, I think it depends on how you measure success. I think, like a lot of things, you have to work out what was the target. It was unrealistic to think that we would get everybody to say, here's the solution, we're all going to do it, here's lots of money, because there's lots of other questions. The great things that came out is they're going to continue talking. I know it's blah, 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 but you need now to put the devil is in the detail. So you put the relevant details in. What's going to happen? How are we going to get to 1.5? How are we going to start reversing that? Because it's not about net to zero. We actually have to reverse it. It has to go below zero because we've already got lots of damage.
Does have
Andrew,
a lot of questions, doesn't it?
It does. What else are you looking at today in the papers?
Unfortunately, as you mentioned in the headlines, there's more sleaze. But what I found really interesting is that Boris and whatever relationships he may or may not have had, there's now they talked about him being the throttle for helping his business lady partner out in business. And there's various other expenses claims and double jobs and so on and so forth. Very interesting survey in The Times, so that they had a focus group. And they asked this focus group, well, would it change how you vote? And what I found fascinating about it is they sort of turn around and say, well, actually, we recognise that most politicians have got sleaze, whether they're drunk on planes or whether they've got double jobs or they've got that sort of side. And sleaze has been a part of politics for a very long time. The question is, and this is the important point, is would it change what you vote for? And what was fascinating, and I think the pollsters often get it wrong, and I've famously predicted all sorts of things against the pollsters, from Trump to Brexit to Theresa May and so on and so forth. They got it wrong. If you might remember last time, May the 6th, it was all about curtains for Boris, Interior resigns, all the headlines, the glorious puns that we always love. But they still got it wrong, because Boris then got the biggest majority they've enjoyed for several years.
And you do rather sense, don't you, bringing up a Jennifer Curie once again. I mean, does anyone really care? That is scraping the bottom of the barrel to bring all that up again, isn't it?
It's totally scraping the bottom of the barrel. And I think also what it deflects from are the real issues. And so often, the problems arise because of communication. And what happens is this, is when you're talking, and the two things you need to separate. One is, what are the rules, and have those rules been broken? And so often, in the classic cases of various ones that have happened, they fudge that issue. And it's rather like going back from, if you look at the 90s, the noughties and the now, you know, you had the original Cash for Questions scandal, you then had the issues about expenses, and people ended up in jail. In fact, if you were a politician during the time of the expenses scandal, you were 4 times more likely to be in jail than the rest of the population. It was an extraordinary statistic. But what happens is you then look at, have rules been broken? If they have been broken, then go through the process. Work out then, if rules haven't been broken, do we need to look at those rules? And I think this is when you're talking about second jobs. And you're talking about, is that distracting people? And people get fudged, if you like, and distracted because you're talking about things like quantum. Does it matter if somebody earns £1 million or they earn £10? Well, it does to the general populace. And you're talking about the red wallers as opposed to the red corders, if you like, the people who wear the corduroy trousers, are typical Tories, as opposed to the red wallers, who are the new Tories, if you like, people who voted in the last election.
The what? The red wallers?
The red wallers, I know, isn't that a great phrase? I
haven't heard that.
You have. The people who are in the red wall, so it's the red wallers versus the red corders. So you get...
I do quite like that.
You get your traditional Tories, who are the red corduroy trousers, and you get the red wallers, who are the new ones. Now, the new ones, when the average wage is 30-odd grand, will think that a politician on 82 grand, why do you need a second job? And what you need to then do is let's look at those rules. And the real missive is, are you being distracted from your real job as a politician to look after your constituency?
And that's the question, isn't it, on everyone's lips. I want to get on to the last story, which is, of course, Prince Charles' birthday, but a sombre one, isn't it? Because it's falling on Remembrance.
It is a sombre one. 73, many happy returns. And, well, happy. It's an interesting time in the royal family, I'll put it that way. What I love, and this for me is one of the glorious stories on today, is that Her Majesty the Queen will be at the cenotaph.
But let's just reflect on this lovely photograph that's been published by Prince Charles, seated as he is in the verdant surroundings of his gardens in Highgrove on a nice sunny day. I don't think that's a November picture, is it?
It was taken in the summer, apparently, yeah.
The Prince Charles, His Royal Highness, looking very good for his age.
I think he looks very good for any age, actually.
Got good genetics, haven't they?
Fantastic genetics. I like what he's done with that little bit of tree behind him, that little mushroom thing. That looks fantastic.
There's a little purple flower as well.
You've got to do the purple flower. I think that the royal family are in troubled times at the moment, as we know, and it always used to be, when growing up, they neither used to deny or confirm, and there was a lot of respect for the royal family. The person around the world of all the heads of state and all the royal families, we punch way above our weight. The respect for the Queen in particular is unprecedented. I know it's an era when we talk about unprecedented more than we should do, but it is. The respect for Her Majesty is phenomenal. So what I do love is that she will be there today, And it will mean so much for the servicemen and women who are there that Her Majesty will be...
And let's not forget, it means so much to Her Majesty herself.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And she served herself during the war, as we know. She was a driver and an engineer and was very much part of the war effort and very much part helping with support the industry in terms of keeping the morale up and so on and so forth. So she absolutely wants it. She'll wear 5 poppies. Which works on that sort of basis, one for each of the services. Oh. So you'll see that.
Which other members of the royal family are there?
Well, Prince Charles now, and he has for a number of years, he'll be laying the wreath. So he'll be, we can wish him well on his birthday. Prince William will be there, and various others. I think some will not be there for obvious reasons, because it could be a distraction.
Andrew Eborn, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for running through the papers for us. Fascinating as always. We will, of course, be covering events at the Cenotaph live here on GB News from about 11:45.